Joining us now on the program is the president of Michigan Future Incorporated. Lou Glazer is with us now on the Megacast. Lou, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Appreciate having you on. So first off, tell us a little bit about Michigan Future Incorporated and some of the work that you do here in the state of Michigan.
Yep. So we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank that got started in 1991. And our work has largely been focused on trying to learn about the economic well-being of Michigan households in a changing economy.
So our economy obviously has made several major changes since 1991. 31 years later, it's very much a technology-driven economy. The state of Michigan is starting to follow along those ways, especially in industries that have been long-standing here in Michigan for several decades or even for over a century, such as the automotive industry. But right now, what are some of the key issues that you and your colleagues at Michigan Future are discussing that regard the future of Michigan economics and Michigan commerce that businesses and individuals even really need to be focusing on right now?
Yeah. Well, so I think the big thing is that if you look at all the successful states and regions across the country, with the exception of places like Alaska and Wyoming, which extract sort of fossil fuels, other than that, the path to prosperity is making the transition from a factory-based to a knowledge-based economy, and the proportion of adults with a four-year degree or more. And Michigan is having trouble with that, both in terms of the reality, but also in terms of our vision. Our vision is pretty much still sort of what I would describe as 20th century driven rather than 21st century driven. So, and the result of that is pretty severe for the state. So Michigan, if you look at the 30 years that we've been doing this work, Michigan's share of national employment has declined from 3.6% to 2.9%. If we were still at 3.6%, there'd be like 600,000 more Michiganders working. And our average wages have gone from maybe 10% above the national average to 10% below. That's like something like $13,000 per year for full-time workers. So our inability to make this transition has really caused us to be poorer compared to the country than we were when we started 30 years ago.
So there's plenty to know about or to consider about what businesses need to do to transition to more of, as you said, a knowledge-based economy. For individual workers, as those transitions are being made by companies, they're already ahead of this. They need to be, in many cases, especially the larger corporations and larger businesses, they are, because that's where the future projections have said they need to go. But for individual workers, that means more automation, that means more AI being in the fold. And so theoretically, a reduction in factory jobs and a reduction even in some desk jobs. So for those individuals, what should they be doing, the individual workers, to prepare themselves for a more generally knowledge-based economy to maintain their jobs and maintain their livelihood right here in their home in Michigan?
Yeah, that is a terrific question. So we've used the analogy for a number of years that career success now looks a lot more like rock climbing than ladder climbing. We've had the traditional notion that you start on sort of the lower rung on the ladder and you move your way up, and it's sort of it's linear and predictable. Increasingly, the people who do the best, whether they have a four-year degree or not, although the four-year degree is still the best path to middle-class wages and above. But for both groups of people, the people that do best are those who, as we say, are more like rock climbers, who are able to constantly adjust. And sometimes that means taking a step back, and sometimes sideways, and sometimes starting a new career. And what we've ended up finding is that the foundation skills for all of those jobs are more generalist skills and more soft skills than they are sort of specialist skills kind of things. So we've ended up using a book called Becoming Brilliant that sort of defines the 6 C's as foundation skills. And, there's a whole variety of lists, but they all end up basically saying the same thing. And a lot of people call them soft skills, but they're really not soft. So they are the 6 C's are collaboration, the ability to work with others, particularly increasingly others that don't look like you and don't think like you. Communication, content, which is sort of traditional academic skills, critical thinking, creativity, and confidence, where confidence means the ability to bounce back from failure. Those are the skills that we all need if we want to have successful careers. It's less about a first job. It's more about the ability to continue to grow and learn and adjust as technology basically is going to keep on changing what jobs are needed and what jobs pay well.
We're joined by Lou Glazer on today's edition of the Megacast. He's the president of Michigan Future Incorporated, joining us on today's program. You can learn more information and read some of their reports and their blog and news reports as well at michiganfuture.org, michiganfuture.org for more information. Lou, you're quoted in a recent article in the Detroit News that was focused on a really interesting issue here in the state of Michigan for businesses and alike for those individuals that are adjusting their careers and are constantly thinking about that next step to keep themselves ahead of the curve and therefore still able to climb that proverbial ladder, albeit with some different twists and turns along the way. And the article is from Hannah McKay at the Detroit News. It's called Michigan's Brain Drain, Why Colleges Lose the Most Graduates and Why They Leave. And it's really one of the main focuses was on when people graduate from some of the more prestigious colleges here in Michigan, they're not staying in Michigan. They're taking jobs in other places and other regions of the U.S. What are some of the key reasons behind that? And then on top of that, what are some things that businesses need to be doing in order to attract this talent coming out of really great schools throughout universities and colleges right here in Michigan?
Yep. So as I mentioned, the single best predictor of whether a state and region is prosperous or not is the proportion of adults, particularly young adults, with a 4-year degree or more. So this really matters not just to recent college graduates, but to how well the state is doing. And before I get into the reason why, I mean, we should have learned that lesson from the Amazon Headquarter 2 competition, where both Detroit and Grand Rapids applied and did not even make the top 20. And Amazon said the reason why the 2 Michigan communities didn't make it is a lack of professionals and managers, sort of talent, and the absence of transit. So let's get to so the Washington Post just did an article that sort of summarized recent research that looked at the difference between the number of recent college graduates in the state and the number of young professionals living in the state. And Michigan was minus 14%, which means that 14%, we have 14% fewer young professionals here than we do recent college graduates. That's a recipe for getting poorer. And all of the states, as the article mentioned, who are positive, have one core characteristic. They have vibrant central cities, which is where young professionals are moving. And Michigan at the moment, so that's why we've argued for a very long time that sort of creating places where young professionals want to live and work, particularly high density, high amenity neighborhoods in central cities, is an economic development priority for Michigan. And the state's still having a hard time learning that lesson.
We're joined by Lou Glazer, president of Michigan Future Incorporated, joining us on today's edition of the Megacast. It is a nonprofit and non-political organization and think tank considering Michigan's economy, both now and in the future. And for reference, from this Detroit News article from Hannah McKay, a couple interesting statistics. Only 4 of the 73 Michigan higher education institutions, including the 15 4-year public universities, 28 public community colleges, and private colleges, reported a higher percentage of in-state graduates than in-state freshmen, and both Michigan Tech and the University of Michigan, who are among the top schools for STEM education in the state, they reported less than half of those graduates from 2010 to 2018 stayed in the state. Michigan Tech at 38%, with the University of Michigan at 40%. So then, Lou, as you and those in your organization are considering these issues, and what steps Michigan businesses and really the government of the state of Michigan can take right now to sort of begin bridging these gaps, albeit that it's going to take some time to really catch up to these other economies that are thriving across the union. What are those steps they should be taking or consider taking right now to start the process of bridging those gaps?
Yep. So I'd say a couple of things. The model for doing this right is Denver. Denver has done this for 30 years and has completely transformed their economy. They understood that this is an economy where talent attracts capital and have made as their priority creating a place where talent wants to live and work. In the 2020 election, the county that Austin, Texas is in, and Austin's already a talent magnet, passed a $7 billion proposal for rail transit. And Denver did the same thing. So it's creating places where talent wants to live and work, where transit is the most important ingredient. That's the stuff that Michigan should be doing now, particularly Detroit and Grand Rapids, our two biggest cities. But Lansing can play in this too. Kalamazoo can play. Ann Arbor has, our cities have to be more attractive to young people, or else they're going to go to Chicago, New York, Seattle, Denver, you name it. And that's the University of Michigan and Michigan Tech problem.
And we've already seen discussions in the state of Michigan or plans that have been put out about ideas to connect the entire state of Michigan through a variety of different railway routes.
Yep.
That would connect various regions of the state, from southeastern Michigan and the lower peninsula all the way up into the upper peninsula. And that is one of those things that really connects to this idea of transitioning the economy and catching up to some of those other places across the U.S. that have really thrived on this sort of a model over the last several decades. You mentioned Denver and you mentioned Austin. And in terms of projections, if these moves are being made right now, you mentioned Denver, it took them about 30 years to really catch up to the times and become a thriving city as it is now. What are the projections looking like if Michigan businesses and the Michigan government combine into that economic impact, start making these changes now? Just how long could it take for Michigan to really catch up to the field?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. I'm just trying to think through the Denver experience. I think they started to see some results in a decade, and then it kept snowballing. The problem is that even though none of this stuff can happen tomorrow, right? I mean, you're not going to sort of fundamentally change Michigan's attractiveness to young professionals overnight. But the more we wait, the longer before we make progress. So we just have to start now. That if there's a lesson from the research that the Detroit News talked about, it is you got to get started now.
More information can be found on Michigan Future's website, michiganfuture.org. You can read the reports, learn more about their initiatives on the Michigan economy, retaining and attracting talent, as Lou's talked about quite extensively today, preparing talent for the future, as well as Michigan Future schools that are helping to prepare all across the board, individuals and, of course, our economy in general for the future of global economics as our world continues to change with a rapidly increasing impact of technology. Lou, anything else for us today that we haven't discussed?
No, I think so. The one quick statistic is 4 in 10 Michigan households cannot pay for basic necessities. That is not a successful economy. So that's why this transition is so important.
More information can be found michiganfuture.org. Lou, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.